What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Jesse Milestone, desperately in need with my own catchphrase so I can stop sounding like Jeremy, though it's really tempting to say, coming to you with another video, but that's his thing, and I'm not gonna do that again, even though I just did that again. Damn it! But I am here with another video. In case you haven't heard, I'm gonna be doing these here sometimes, so if you like that, that's great. If you don't, watch the videos I'm not in, I guess. If you really like that, go to Mindless Entertainment and subscribe to my channel too. Today I want to talk about another troubling thing about the Disney Star Wars and what that's brought about. And the thing I want to speak to today is the fan divide, because it's really bad. And, even though a lot of the fans of The Last Jedi, why are there any? But a lot of the fans they're the ones being like, oh, the haters are so aggressive and we're so mean and we're so terrible. Actually, we're just out here speaking our minds, and you're far too fragile and sensitive to hear that without taking it personally and crying into your pillow about it. No, we are actually the ones being targeted a lot more. If you're one of the people who's actually publicly in any sorts of forums complained about The Last Jedi, you've probably taken a lot of heat. You've possibly been, downvoted straight out of the forum, or in cases people have had their information blocked. They've had threads shut down because people were reporting it, because like, oh my god, if you hate this movie, then you hate me, and that's offensive. Like, seriously. And that, the worst one, the absolute worst one for me, is that there are so many people who are fans of the Disney Star Wars who claim that anyone who hates The Last Jedi is not a real fan. What? How does that not sound ridiculous to you coming out of your own mouth? Like, how does that not immediately strike you as an absurd thing to say? Oh my god, these movies that you loved, that you grew up with, that you lived and died by in the 70s, that are now completely different because it's been so many freaking years. It's been over 30 years now, and an entirely different franchise is now in control of these movies, an entirely different studio, different people, different writers, different everything. How dare you not like these? How dare you claim you like the original material, but you don't like everything that's happened to it in the subsequent 30 freaking years? Are you kidding me? That's just, I mean, if it didn't sound ridiculous coming out of your mouth, does it sound ridiculous now? Does it? Because if not, I can keep going. That's not an issue for me. And you want to sit here, people, you want to tell me I'm not a fan. I've had people accuse me of that. Oh, you're not a real Star Wars fan. If you hated on this movie, if you can't let it go, you're not a real Star Wars fan. Okay. Well, I'm about to get hipster on your ass and throw you my OG Star Wars fan resume. All right? Couple things. One of the things, right, people sit there and they're like, oh, well, you're just jumping on the bandwagon. You probably loved The Force Awakens. Where were you after The Force Awakens? Where was I after The Force Awakens? Complaining about how much I hated The Force Awakens. There is evidence of this, because 5 months afterwards, I was still stewing about it. I hadn't done really any movie reviews. I hadn't gotten into film at all. My channel was still mostly talking about totally other things at that point. And there's a Meant to Offend video where I argue why The Force Awakens is worse than the prequels. So that's where I was. Yeah, I've hated Disney Star Wars since The Force Awakens, thank you very much. And I know Jeremy is a defender of that movie. I know he liked it when he saw it, and that's okay, Jeremy. You're allowed to be wrong sometimes too. It's fine. And we talked about that a little bit. I can respect where he's coming from, because we looked at the elements that they set up in that movie totally differently. The optimists among us, wanted to see, and I tried to be one. I really, really, really tried to be optimistic about that movie. I mean, I was excited. When I learned that J.J. Abrams was doing it, I was on board. When I learned that he had built a full-scale model of the Millennium Falcon, I was super on board. When the movie initially started, when it very, very first started, I cried during the opening crawl, because, oh my god, I'm in a movie theater again watching a Star Wars movie. This is so exciting. And then it opened, and I was like, wow, this is like the old Star Wars. And then I was like, this is exactly like the old Star Wars. This is too much like the old Star Wars. And I was still trying to do that thing that a lot of people did, the whole cognitive dissonance thing of, I really want to like Star Wars. I'm being confronted with a bad movie, so I'm just gonna mental override and tell myself it's good and make up reasons why it is. And then they killed Han Solo. And they didn't just kill him, they disgraced him by erasing his beautiful character arc that he went through in the original movies. And then they killed him to serve no purpose other than, well, he's the Obi-Wan character in this movie. He's the, you know, the wise old mentor coming on this hero's journey, and this is the part where he dies. And that's it. And now again, Jeremy and I look at this differently. For Jeremy, that moment was a moment to set up an important developmental feature of Kylo Ren that we would come to understand later in the trilogy. And that's how he looked at all of these things. Everything I saw, well, they only did this to mimic the original hero's journey of Luke Skywalker. That was it. It was just a mirror, a pathetic parody, a sad reboot of the original one. A tragic remake, and Jeremy had faith in JJ and the writers in the story to say, no, these things are here for a reason. They're going to set up important elements later on. And I say to you now, that was incredibly naive of you, my friend, which I believe you will even say now, seeing what they did with it. You know, he and a lot of other people, not wrongly, put their faith in JJ and in the writers to say, well, you're going to handle this respectfully. You're going to do right by us, and you're going to take us somewhere meaningful. And that's fine, but I want to quote a chick flick right now. I'm going to quote 27 Dresses, which is an amazing movie full of Katherine Heigl, who I know a lot of people hate, but also James Marsden, who's gorgeous. So yeah, this is ridiculous. There's a scene in the movie where she's been this good big sister this whole way, even though her little sister is marrying the man of her dreams and all of this stuff and whatnot, and then she takes her mother's wedding dress, which Katherine Heigl's character had always wanted to get married in, and she chops it all up and uses little bits and scraps to make her new wedding dress. And Katherine Heigl has a line where she's like, well, you're not gonna do anything because you're my sister. And she's like, yeah, that was yesterday. Now you're just some bitch who cut up my mother's wedding dress. And that's how I feel about what they did to Han Solo. I was like, well, J.J. Abrams, you were a filmmaker that I had great respect and love and admiration for, and now you're just some asshole who killed Han Solo. That's where my soul lives on that. So I was out. I saw that for me, you know, and that is a big thing. Like I said, I'm gonna get OG on my Star Wars lore. So that's my first hipster point, was I hated Disney Star Wars before it was cool. And I certainly didn't like Star Wars before it was cool. I'm not old enough to claim that mantle. I'm certainly not old enough to have seen it in the theaters when it first came out, which would have been awesome. But I was raised by people who did. You know, my dad waited in line for the first release, and my dad was a total nerd, and I love and respect him for that. So I'm interested to, and that's the funny thing for me, going back to this whole people who love The Last Jedi say that if you don't, you're not a real Star Wars fan. My dad hated The Last Jedi. My dad waited in line for A New Hope. I mean, you're going to seriously say he's not a real Star Wars fan? And that I have heard very, very few people who are the ones who I've yet to hear anybody say, I've been a Star Wars fan since 1977. I went to see Star Wars in theaters. I've loved it since the beginning of time, and I love The Last Jedi. I have yet to hear anybody. If you know of somebody, or you are one of those people who feels that way, I'd love to hear from you. Talk to me about that. Tell me why. I really want to know. Why have you gone on this journey, and have you survived this far from 1977 until today? But for the most part, you guys, you real OG fans, are not those people who are not on board with what Disney's doing to Star Wars, and that should be a clear indication of how they've failed the fan base, of how they failed the franchise and the legacy that is Star Wars. Not that they actually give a shit about that. But anyway, I have been a fan of Star Wars pretty much all my life. I mean, again, my parents being fans of it themselves, especially my dad, he was just, the movie's rated PG. Let's let the kids watch it when they're like 5. Actually 5 or younger. I mean, I have almost no actual memories of my life without knowing what Star Wars was. I have no relevant, personal identity that isn't wrapped up in Star Wars. My very first imaginary friend as a child was Luke Skywalker. My very first one. Closely followed by Han. And the thing is, Han Solo for me was not just an imaginary friend. I was a very imaginative kid. I had created an entire world where I got to do whatever I wanted. I got to, fly and do magic and fight and all this crazy stuff. And there was a person who ran this world, who I ultimately overthrew, but helped me anyway after I overthrew him, and he continued to train me. He was my role model, my very first role model, my mentor, the person that in my imaginary world, was my guide. And I went, and he persisted in that role for as long as I had imaginary friends, which could still be till today, as far as you know. No, but I mean, my entire, formative years growing up, whenever I went back to my imaginary friend who was always there for me, who was always came to me with advice and picked me up and kept me going, that was Han Solo. Han Solo has been my role model, my hero, my mentor, all my entire life, who is responsible for me being the person I am today. And they disgraced him and they killed him. So that's why I'm not a fan of the new ones. And if that makes me not a real fan of Star Wars, then that's bullshit. I mean, then y'all can go suck a big one. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And that's a thing, and it just, it's so ridiculous to say. It's like saying that if somebody doesn't like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, that they hate Spider-Man. You didn't hear anybody say that, oh, well, if you didn't like the Star Trek reboots, then you're not a Star Trek fan. If you didn't like Deep Space Nine, then you're not a Star Trek fan. Even there are people who like Next Generation. There are tons and tons and tons of people who love Next Generation and aren't crazy about the original series. And people don't even say those aren't real Star Trek fans. I am original series for life. I can watch Kirk do those ridiculous roles forever and ever and ever. And young William Shatner is gorgeous. But you don't hear that. You don't hear this. I mean, that's like, because there have been so many iterations of Star Trek that have been loved, that have been hated. There have been movies that have been hailed as great, and other ones that are just absolutely atrocious. And that's before the new ones. And you don't hear that kind of hatred, in the Star Trek. You might get a funny look if you're like, Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek. People might be like, what's wrong with you? But they're not going to be like, well, obviously you're not a real Star Trek fan if you like that. That's just not, I mean, who would have thunk that me, Star Wars person for life, is going to sit here and be like, we should be more like Star Trek fans. I don't have a lot of animosity to Star Trek fans. I'm a casual enjoyer of Star Trek myself, but it's ridiculous. I may not understand why somebody likes The Last Jedi. I may debate them on it. I may say incendiary things to them because that's fun for me. I may even say I think you're kind of an idiot for liking it. That's probably as extreme as I'll get when I'm talking to somebody one-on-one, and I probably won't even go that far. But I'm not going to tell you hate Star Wars if you like The Last Jedi. I'm not going to tell you don't understand Star Wars. I understand people's reasons for liking The Last Jedi. Most of it, I think, is cognitive dissonance. It's this idea that, well, I'm a Star Wars fan, so I have to like Star Wars, or I love Star Wars. Just having people who have a really strong paradigm like me, I love Star Wars. That's a very powerful part of my life, my identity. It's a very powerful part of a lot of Star Wars fans' identities, and it's very hard to reconcile. I love Star Wars with this Star Wars is utter garbage. And some people just don't reconcile the two. Some people just do that by having that block where they go, well, I'm going to like and defend this movie. And I'm so fragile in my beliefs that I'm going to not only like and defend it, but shit on everybody who disagrees. And that's what makes, dissent is fosters conversation, fosters betterment of people, and fosters your inner strength, because I feel that I am a better Star Wars fan. I mean, that's sorry. I don't want to get the device right. I'm a better Star Wars fan than you are. No, I'm a better Star Wars fan for myself by being able to look critically at these films and say what I like about them, what I hate about them, what I accept about them, and what I do not. And still, at the end of the day, I love Star Wars. Star Wars, I mean, hey, people who are like, Star Wars is ruined for me. Like, no. The existence of these terrible movies does not detract from my love of the originals, or my willingness to sit down and watch the originals, or my enjoyment of them. I am still a fan of Star Wars. I will always be a fan of what Star Wars is and what it's meant to be. And I still feel, I mean, even though I do that on the inside whenever I meet a small child who's like, The Force Awakens is my favorite Star Wars. And I'm like, no, it's not. But I'm not going to yell at children. Mostly because yelling at children is frowned upon for having that bad judgment. I mean, when I was 8, I thought The Phantom Menace was the greatest thing ever. And there are still things I like about it a lot. Is it because I was 8 when I saw it for the first time? Maybe. Is it because we were way too harsh on it because it wasn't original Star Wars? Maybe. I think it'd be really, really funny if we saw, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, and then somebody came out with the prequels and we had never seen them before. In fact, that's an interesting social experiment. If you ever meet someone who hasn't seen Star Wars, show 4, 5, 6, show them the new ones, and then show them the prequels and see how that simmers in their bodies. That would be anyway. My point is that there's no need to be divided over whether or not we like and hate this movie. I can like it, you can hate it. I can hate it, you can like it. I despise it, as in case that was not clear to anybody. But we don't have to hate each other for that. We're still Star Wars fans. That's still what connects us and bonds us together. And that used to be important. That used to be important, that all the nerds came together over certain things and had that culture that connected us. And now that Star Wars has kind of been ripped away from the nerds in a big way, it seems to be less important to people. But now, more than ever, in a time where all we get is divisiveness, it is so important that we find things that still bring us together. And we all love the original movies. Love or hate the Disney ones, we love the originals. We love them together. So let's come together over that. That's all I gotta say.